Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Model Kit Review. In today's fun review video, we will be looking at Otaki's classic 1/48 scale Kawanishi N1K1-J Shiden, or George. This is Otaki kit number OT2-7. In this review, we'll be looking at the built-up kit. I'll be giving a brief history of the N1K1, and I'll talk about what other kits are available of this aircraft. We'll also go through the kit instructions and talk about those. We'll look at the marking guide for this kit and talk about the decal options that are included. We'll talk about the quality of the decals. And we'll also look at the level of detail on the smaller parts that are included with this kit. We'll look at the fit and clarity of the clear parts. We'll look at the surface detailing on the exterior parts. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the detailing on the interior of the kit. I'll go over any aftermarket parts that I used in this build. I'll also talk about any potential problem areas to watch out for during construction. And we'll be trying to answer the question with the newer Tamiya and Hasegawa releases of the N1K1-J. Is this classic Otaki kit still worth building? The Kawanishi N1K1 and N1K2 fighter aircraft are fairly unique in the history of fighter aircraft. The original N1K1 was designed as a float plane fighter. The N1K1 was probably the best float plane fighter fielded during World War II. I have previously reviewed Tamiya's N1K1 float plane fighter. You can click the link to see that review. And somewhere along the line, the Japanese Navy decided to develop the N1K1 into a land-based fighter aircraft. The resulting N1K1-J, and that's the subject of this kit, was a mid-wing fighter aircraft. It had very good performance, it had very good maneuverability, and it had awesome firepower. It had two 50 caliber machine guns and four 20mm cannon. Some of the weak points of the N1K1 were a somewhat unreliable engine and very long and complex landing gear that often gave trouble. Kawanishi went on to develop a much simpler low-wing version, and they called this version the N1K2. I've also reviewed Hasegawa's N1K2-J, and you can click the link to see that review here. Looking at what comes in the box, this kit has 3 sprues of gray plastic parts and 1 sprue of clear parts in addition to a decal sheet. This kit is not parts heavy at all. This kit came with an instruction sheet that is written in English. This corresponds with the construction steps that are shown. This sheet is nice to have because all the verbiage on the diagrams is in Japanese. Looking at the instructions, in step 1, we're assembling the wing, top, and bottom halves. We're also installing the underwing cannon pods and the landing gear. I deviated from the sequence here. I did not add the landing gear until after the model was assembled and painted. One thing to note is that the gear bay detail is very simplified. It's also very shallow. Looking at the underwing detail, you can see the gun pods, you can see the landing gear. One aftermarket addition that I made to this kit was to add some resin wheels to it. These have a little bit of a flat spot on the underside, and the sit on these is much more realistic than the original kit wheels. Moving on to step 2, this covers the cockpit assembly. This is incredibly basic, and it's also kind of a cartoon representation of what's inside the actual aircraft. The good news is, on the finished kit, you really can't see a whole lot through the cockpit canopy. It's a little bit thick and a little bit on the translucent side. It's not incredibly clear, but that hides a lack of detail in this case. Moving on to step 3, we are closing up the fuselage around the interior, and then we're adding the oil cooler and the gear doors underneath. Again, I waited on the gear doors until later on in the assembly sequence. The fit on these parts was excellent, and it only required minor seam cleanup on the major seams. In step 4, we're building the engine and installing that on the aircraft. We're also installing the tail planes and the underside fuel tank. I didn't have any issues with the fit on these parts. Everything fit together nicely, and you're not going to be able to see much of the engine through the very closely cowled engine cowling on the N1K1. In step 5, we're adding the cockpit transparencies. We're also adding the engine cowling and the prop. One issue I had with this step is that the hole that is in the center of the prop is off center, so it took a little bit of work to get the prop centered on the engine cowl opening. There are 3 marking options included in the kit. All of these are the Imperial Japanese Navy green over Imperial Japanese Navy gray. I use polyscale paints for this build. There is a nice full color painting of the N1K1 that's included, and I just think that's a really nice touch. The painting is of the first marking option. The second marking option is for the box art plane. The decals themselves went down great. The color on the decals was in register. The colors are opaque, and they really look nice on the finished kit. And on this build, I used some aftermarket kill markings to spruce up the exterior just a little bit. The surface detail on the exterior of the kit is represented by fine rivets and engraved panel lines, and honestly, this looks really nice. To my eye, this is not excessively overdone, and the rivets are fine enough that they look decent in this scale. The fit on the major parts, with the exception of the kit propeller, was very, very good. I did not need to use putty anywhere on this build. The detail on the smaller parts in the interior and on the landing gear legs, it's definitely simplified. It's somewhat basic. And if you're looking for a more detailed, more realistic build, I would suggest building the Tamiya or Hasegawa N1K1-Js. When I purchased this kit, I got it for $5 at the local hobby store. These kits are very inexpensive, and to me, they represent a really good value for what you get. Due to the low initial purchase price of this kit, the low parts count, and the ease of construction, I can recommend this kit highly to newer modelers or modelers who are looking to break back into the hobby, and even experienced modelers who are just looking for a simple build after a more involved modeling project. Well, I'd love to know what you guys think. If any of you out there have built Otaki's N1K1-J previously, please feel free to comment in the comment section below. As always, I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, and until next time, model on.